وكل ضلال في النار أما بعد. In the short time that we have before us between now and sunrise here in the United States of America, in the state of Florida, in Palm Beach, that I wish to continue that which we began in the evening or yesterday evening, before Maghrib and then after Maghrib till Isha, and now after Fajr. And that is the discussion on the topic of At-Tawheed. Now there's an issue here, my brothers and sisters, with regard to the issue of At-Tawheed as in the view of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, as established in the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the early Salaf of this Ummah, or the earliest pious generations of this Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as compared to the Tawheed in the minds of the Mutakallimeen. Now the Mutakallimeen is that group of individuals that arose after the first and second generations of Muslims, and during that period of time. The Mutakallimeen in essence are individuals who started to philosophize regarding the nature, as they claimed, the nature, quote unquote, and the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the dhat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they started to speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based upon reasoning, logic, rationale, Greek philosophy, and other than that. And the whole of this discussion of theirs was labeled by the scholars as the knowledge of ilmul kalam, or the knowledge of rhetoric and rationale and logic, Greek logic in essence, and also those ideas of philosophy that they took from the Hindus and so on. So they infiltrated that type of ideology within to Islam, and they started speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge, meaning without revelation. And they referred the verses of Allah, or the verses of the Quran, and the ayat in the Book of Allah, and the hadith of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, connected to the affairs of the unseen, such as the names of Allah, the attributes of Allah, the hereafter, the punishment in the grave, the bridge over the hellfire, those affairs that will take place in the hereafter, the nature of the soul, and other than that. And they started to talk about those types of issues in light of logic and philosophical principles, and principles that were alien to Islam. So how is this connected to Tawheed in the language that we are using, in light of that which we have already mentioned? Then one of the great scholars of our time, Shaykh al-Fawzan hafidhullah, he mentions هناك من يقول التوحيد نوع واحد فقط. There are a group of people, or there is a person who will come along, and here he's talking about the Mutakallimeen. They will come along and they will say that At-Tawheed is only one category or one type. وهو توحيد الربوبية وهو الاعتراف بأن الله هو الخالق والرازق المحيي والمميت إلى آخر ما جاء من أفعال الله وصفاته جل وعلا. So these people, they will come along and they say Tawheed is only one thing, and that is the Lordship of Allah. And that is that we affirm that Allah is the creator, Allah is the provider, Allah is the giver of life, Allah is the giver of death, and so on and so forth, connected to the attributes of Allah and Allah's acts, or Allah's actions. However, there were a group of Mutakallimeen, and this is what they're known for, that they even stripped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of even His names and attributes completely. They said Allah has no names and Allah has no attributes, and they are known as the Mu'attila, or they are known as the Jahmiyyah, those who stripped Allah, claiming that they are purifying Allah. They called it tanzih. That's the term that they used. They said that we are making tanzih, that we are purifying Allah. What do they intend by purifying Allah? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be described with any names or any attributes, because any name or any attribute that is applied to Allah multiplies the creator. So they said Allah is one, so therefore Allah has no names. Allah cannot be described with Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Quddus, As-Sami', Al-Basir, They said, no, we cannot describe Allah with these titles because this is to multiply the Creator. This is to divide the Creator into many deities. And this was the logic that they used. So a group of them said, Allah has no names, Allah has no attributes. Then another group, what they would do is that they would affirm some of the attributes and some of the names. Or some of them, they would deny all of the attributes and affirm the names, but then when it came to the names, they would say these names do not carry any meaning to them. So when we say Allah is Al-Basir, the all-seeing, this does not mean that He is the all-seeing. So when we say Allah is As-Sami', that Allah is the all-hearing, they said, no, this does not mean that Allah actually hears. So what were these? These were just titles applied and refer back to one essence, and that is Allah. But they did not, that these names of Allah do not actually carry any meanings. For example, like you may have a person, an example here is a person may be called Salih. What does Salih mean? Righteous. But he lies and he cheats and he deceives. And he doesn't pray and he doesn't fast. Is he Salih? No. But his name is Salih. But the name actually carries no meaning because he is far from being Salih. Right? But with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of Allah's names, they carry with them the name and the meaning of that name. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described Himself and has named Himself, for example, Al-Basir, the all-seeing, then we affirm that from Allah's names is that He is the all-seeing. Also, that the all-seeing, meaning that His name is Al-Basir, that's His name. But also alongside that, it actually means that He is indeed the all-seeing. He sees everything. And also this has an effect upon the creation. Meaning that Allah is described with Al-Basar. He is described with having sight. That Allah sees. In reality, He sees everything. But however, Ahlul Kalam came along and they started applying logic and rationale. And they started reading the books of Plato and Aristotle. And they were translated into Arabic. Before the Europeans, because in the culture of the Europeans, in the time of the 2nd and 3rd century of Islam, they'd actually lost the books of Aristotle and Plato. They'd been lost to the Europeans. The Europeans were actually living in the Dark Ages. And that's what they actually literally called. They called the Dark Ages. And many of the writings of the philosophers of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, and other than them, that many of their writings, if not the vast proportion of their writings, had been lost. But when some of these Arabs, they entered into Europe, and they started mixing with the Europeans, they found some of the writings of Plato and Aristotle, and other than them, from the mathematicians and from the scientists and from the philosophers of the Europeans. What did they do? They took those writings and translated them into Arabic. And they brought them into the Islamic lands. And many of these people of logic and kalam and philosophy, they started taking the logic of Plato and the rationale of Plato and the writings of these philosophers, and they started applying them, and they thought to themselves, let us see whether the Quran can fit around the writings of these philosophers and the ideas of these philosophers. Then when the Arabs started mixing with the Europeans, meaning with the Western Europeans and with Rome, the Europeans found these writings of the Arabs. And they said, these are the writings of Plato and Aristotle, these are our forefathers. So they translated from Arabic into Latin. So even though it had been lost to the Europeans, some of the Arabs, they found those writings, translated them into Arabic. The Europeans said, well, where did the Arabs get these from? They got it from our culture. Let's retranslate back from Arabic into the European languages. And thus, some of the ideas of the Greeks that had been lost were reintroduced into Western ideology. Nevertheless, the point here being what they did to the religion, what they did with regard to the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, the scholars of Kalam, or the scholars who are known as the rationalists and the people of logic and philosophy, and their counterparts who have, from their aqidah or from their understanding of their aqidah and from their logic and intellect, that they started to utilize this ideology as it relates to the Tawheed of Allah. And their creed and their ideas are present today, even amongst the ranks of the Muslims. Many of the Muslims, they don't even realize that they carry these ideologies. They don't realize it. Like for example, we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above His throne, above the creation, distinct from His creation. So, what is the ideology of Plato and the philosophers of old and these Ahlul Kalam? What does that necessitate in their mind? In their mind, it necessitates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being confined. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being given direction. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being ascribed a body, a jism. Why? Because this is the logic of the Greeks. That anything and everything that can be given attributes and actions can take place within it, then it necessitates that thing is a body. If it is a body, then it is confined. And if it is confined, it can no longer be given the attributes of a deity or of the creator. This is the idea of Ahlul Kalam, the Jahmiyyah. This is what they came with. They said that if you now describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with any attributes, and more so those attributes that are connected to the will of Allah, the Mashi'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like for example, Allah ascends whenever He wills. Allah ascended over the arsh. So Allah ascended over the arsh after the creation of the heavens and the earth in 6 days. They say, no, this is not possible. Because this means that an event has taken place that was not already present. And anything within which an event takes place, then that thing therefore must be considered to be a jism, must be considered to be a body. This is not Islamic. This is not the aqeedah that is taken from the Quran and the Sunnah. These are principles that are taken from the Greeks and the philosophers that was introduced into Islam. So now you find a sect that is present today known as the Ash'ariyah, the Ash'aris. They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be described as being above. And Allah cannot be described as having ascended over His throne. And Allah cannot be described as one who descends in the last third of the night, because they are hadith, mutawatira in fact. There are so many hadith of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that mention where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that our Lord descends to the lowest heaven in the last third of the night. And likewise the Prophet ﷺ said that our Lord descends to the nearest heaven on the day of Arafah. These hadith are mutawatira, meaning in their authenticity, they are so numerous, narrated by so many companions of Allah's Messenger, and then narrated by those tabi'een, those who took from the knowledge of Allah's Messenger from the companions of Allah's Messenger ﷺ. So much so that you'll find these hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and Abu Dawud and Surah Tirmidhi and so on. So many in number that it is impossible in the conditions of hadith, it is impossible that the people could have gathered together to invent a lie. This is the meaning of the hadith, which is mutawatir. So many narrations, in fact, it reaches the authenticity of the Quran itself, that Allah descends to the lowest heaven in the last third of the night. They say no, Allah cannot descend. Because to ascribe descent to Allah, to the nearest heaven, means that an event has taken place that was not there before. So therefore, any object in their eyes, this is them, anything within which an event takes place that was not already present from eternity, then it means that it must be considered as a body. If it is a body, by necessity it is created. This is why the Ash'ariyah of today, the Ash'aris of today, and this is the vast majority of those callers in America who ascribe themselves to Islam. Callers, you see them on podiums and platforms in famous huge conferences that take place around the United States of America, that they ascribe themselves to the Ash'ari madhab. They say we are Ash'aris, and they will say that the Ash'aris are Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Whereas in reality, where are they taking it from? They're taking it from the Greeks. And their founder, Jahm bin Safwan, who died in the year, actually he was executed in the year 128 by the Muslim ruler. And likewise, he took it from an individual known as Ja'ad ibn Dirham, who was executed 4 years before him in the year 124 after the Hijrah. In fact, he was executed on the day of Eid al-Adha, by the ruler of that land, because he heard this individual was saying these things that he was ascribing to Allah. He said he said to the people, imagine on the Eid khutbah, he told the people, today, O people, is the day of Adha and the day of Nahar, so go out and slaughter. As for me, then I will make the slaughtering of Ja'ad ibn Dirham. For indeed he says that Allah does not speak. He says that Allah does not speak. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking when He wills, whenever He wills, to whomever He wills. Then this necessitates that an event has taken place that was not already present. And what's the principle they set up? That when an event takes place in the Creator, or with the Creator, Allah, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, that was not already there from eternity, and it is connected to the will of Allah, then it necessitates that being is a body, number one, a jism, and secondly, a jism is therefore a body, therefore is created. This is what Ja'ad was trying to say. He also said, Ja'ad ibn Dirham said that Allah did not take Ibrahim alayhi salam as a Khalil. Allah mentions in the Quran that Allah took Ibrahim alayhi salam as a Khalil. Also he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not above the heavens, that He is not above His creation. Why? Because all of these three things, Allah's speech, Allah taking Ibrahim as a Khalil, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being above the seven heavens, all of this necessitated opposing ilmul kalam that Ja'ad ibn Dirham was upon. So he was executed for that. But the ideology actually remained. All they did was they diluted it. And they made it mainstream. So they said, Allah does speak. So we said, okay, Allah speaks. They said, yes, Allah does speak. But when you scratch under the surface of what they mean by that, because the Ash'aris today will say Allah speaks, but then you say, hold on, what do you mean? Do you affirm that Allah spoke the Quran? They say, no. This is not what we mean. We mean that Allah's kalam is kalam nafsi, meaning that it is the speech of Allah in the essence of Allah. It is the speech of the self of Allah. It is not spoken with words. So you say, hold on, which speech is the speech that is not spoken with words? They say, no, it's not. It is not words. It is not kalam, meaning that it is not, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak with words. But you said Allah speaks. They said, yeah, He does speak, but He's not with words. So what does He speak with? They said He speaks to Himself. So does He have words? They say no. Letters? No. Voice? No. Then when you scratch under the surface, you say, well, the Quran that we have today, are these the words of Allah or not? Well, they are the words of Jibreel, inspired by Allah into Jibreel. And they are the words of Muhammad. This is what they said. Now this is a violation of Tawheed. This is a violation of Tawheed. But actually, it goes into other arenas also, with regard to the Tawheedul Ibadah also. So the Ash'ari of today, who call themselves Ash'aris, are in fact upon the Aqidah of the Jahmiyyah, of those ancient philosophers, Ahlul Kalam and rhetoric. They do not accept that Allah spoke with words and letters. As for Ahlul Sunnah, then we believe that the Quran is Kalamullah. This is the Aqidah of the Muslim, that the Quran these are the words of Allah. This is what we say to the non-Muslims when we give them da'wah. We say to them, we have a book. It is the Quran. These are the words of Allah. The words of Allah are not created, because Allah speaks. And the speech of Allah is an attribute of Allah, is it not, my brothers? Attribute of Allah or not? The speech of Allah. Of course it is the attribute of Allah. Are the attributes of Allah created? No, because that's the words of whom? Ahlul Kalam. They are the ones who say that the speech of Allah is created. The Jahmiyyah. the deniers of the attributes of Allah. And in essence, the ideology of the Jahmiyyah of old, and likewise those people of rhetoric of today, in essence what this leads to is the ideology of atheism. That you strip Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala up until you say Allah does not speak, Allah does not hear, Allah does not see, Allah does not ascend, Allah does not descend, Allah does not have a face. Whilst we believe that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that indeed you will see the face of Allah. Indeed you will see the face of Allah just as you see the sun on a cloudless day when it shines in the sky. Just as you see the moon on a cloudless night when it is at its full, you will see your Lord. So Allah will be seen Yawm al-Qiyamah by the believers. This is the aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah. But the Jahmiyyah, they came along and said, no, you cannot say Allah has a face, because the face is an attribute. So what did they do? They came with another ideology. They said that any attribute that contains within it resemblance to the creation, then we reject that attribute. So they said the creation sees and Allah sees. This is a resemblance. So we cannot ascribe sight to Allah. The creation has eyes, and Allah describes in the Quran that He has eyes. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ said that the Dajjal, he is one-eyed, and indeed your Lord is not one-eyed. And Allah mentioned in the Quran, and it sailed underneath our eyes, referring to the ark of Nuh alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself in the Quran as, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself as hearing and seeing and knowing and living. So what the Jahmiyyah they did, that they took these attributes of Allah. So the origin that they came with is what? That anything within which an event takes place is a body. Every body is created. So there are no attributes of Allah that are connected to the will of Allah. No attributes of Allah that are connected to the will of Allah. So Allah in their eyes does not get angry. So they said Allah cannot get angry. And Allah does not get pleased. Why? Because they say, how can it be that an event has taken place within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can an event take place here? These are their words, not our words. So they said, for example, in the eyes of the Jahmiyyah and the Ash'aris of today, they will say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be angry with a person one day and be pleased with him the next day. They say this is not possible. Why? Because this is connected to the will of Allah. An event has taken place that was not there previously. This is impossible for Allah. So what did they try to do? They put restrictions around the attributes of Allah. They say it cannot be possible. So a person is a Jew today, or an idol worshipper today, or a Christian today, or a Buddhist today, or a Sikh today, and he associates partners in worship with Allah today, or a Muslim drinks today, or kills today, or lies today, or steals today. Is Allah pleased with him or angry with him? What is He? Pleased or angry? Angry. Allah is angry because all of these are oppression and transgression and sins, shirk and crimes and criminality. Allah is angry. Then in the night time, that person makes tawbah, becomes a Muslim. For example, if he was a non-Muslim, or he repents from his crime and he's stealing or he's killing. In the night he cries to Allah and repents, or he becomes a Muslim the next day. The idol worshipper now is a Muslim, and he makes sajda to the ground, and he prays in jama'ah. Is Allah pleased with him or angry with him now? Yesterday he was. Today they say this is not possible for Allah. The Ash'aris, the Jahmiyyah, they say this is not possible for Allah. And the reason being, because they say this is an event. An event cannot take place in the Creator, because that would necessitate that the Creator is a body upon the principles of whom? The Greeks. Not the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah. So there are millions and millions of Muslims walking across the earth and around the earth, believing these principles to be correct. and holding them to be principles of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. If I was to give you some of the names of these personalities, wallahi, you'd be shocked. Some of you already know. Others of you would be shocked. They believe this. They believe this. And they derive it from the ideas of those Ahlul Kalam of old. So this creed is present today. It is manifested in many forms. Now let's bring it down to how you will recognize it. If you were to read their books, you would not find in their books except the affirmation of Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. So according to them, whoever affirms just this Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sustained everything, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything, then to them this one is a muwahid. These are signs of Ahlul Kalam, by the way. These are signs of these people. This is not restricted only to this. In their viewpoint, there is no such thing as Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, the Tawheed of worship, where the servant, that he directs all of his acts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't believe in this category, and they don't affirm this category. Or if they believe in it, they will not affirm it. Or they will affirm a portion of it and reject a portion of it. They also deny and they reject the Tawheed of singling out Allah alone with His names and attributes, and some of that I've already touched upon. For this reason, they do not consider the worshipping of the inhabitants of the graves and supplicating to the dead, they do not consider it to be shirk. Some of them, they will say that this is wasila to Allah. This is just a nearness to Allah. Or that the people, in the inhabitants of the graves, whether it be the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or whether it be the companions like Ali, or Hussein, or Umar, or Abu Bakr, or whether it be from the righteous Salaf of this ummah like Abdul-Qadir al-Jilani or other than that they will regard them to be intercessors. So, some of them, from those who are drowned in the ideas of politics and in the political arena, and all they want to talk about is the presidents and the rulers and the parliaments and so on and so on. This is their only concern. What will they say? They will say, okay, leave them alone, leave them to that. Because this is a matter of ijtihad. They even write it in their books, that the tawaf of the graves is an issue of ijtihad. Meaning it is an opinion, it is a juristic opinion. Whether you make the tawaf of a grave or whether you make sajda to the grave. Really what is the important thing is, let's gain power. Let's establish the Islamic State. What Islamic State can be established upon shirk? You tolerate shirk at the graves and tawaf of the graves and sajda at the graves and seeking aid at the graves, and then you talk about an Islamic State. What is an Islamic State? If it's fundamental, it's not Tawheed. The Islamic State is what? La ilaha illallah. It is established upon La ilaha illallah. This is why we say that when those people come along and they talk about the Islamic State, the Islamic State, the Islamic State, what they are really talking about is, we want power, we want power, we want power. They are not talking about the kalima la ilaha illallah. They are not talking about establishing the Tawheed as it is found in the books of old. They are not talking about Usul Sunnah of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, or Sharh Sunnah of Imam al-Barbahari, or Sharh Usul I'tiqad Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah of Imam al-Lalaka'i. This is not what they are referring to. They are referring to the seat of power and governance itself. So we sit back and we look down upon the people because we are in charge, and we will call it the Islamic State. Why? Because they will perform the nikah in the courts and the divorces in the courts. And maybe they may chop off the hand of the thief, and to them this is Islam. As for people worshipping the graves and calling upon the dead and believing that Allah is everywhere, to them this is hurriya. This is give the people freedom to worship as they wish to worship. Meaning, call upon the dead in their graves. They're not concerned with this. They just want the seat of authority. This is what the Khawarij they want. And this is what they wanted in Egypt. A few years ago when they gained power in Egypt, did you see any graves getting knocked down? Any grave? Did you see them preventing the people from going to the grave of Ahmad al-Badawi Ahmed al-Badawi's grave is huge in proportions. Even before they reach it itself, they take off their shoes. Before they reach the mausoleum, or this place that they reach, the dome, and his resting place, before they reach it, they take off their shoes. When they exit it, they don't turn their back to it, they walk backwards. Because they don't want to turn their back upon it. And they prostrate at it. And you'll find graves in many of the masajid in Cairo. Graves inside of the masajid, inside of the mosques. This is commonplace, calling upon the dead. But they didn't knock any of them down. Did they prevent the Shia from worshipping their graves and worshipping their deities that they worship? They didn't prevent any of this, because this wasn't the goal for them. The goal for them was the mere fact that they've gained authority. We've done it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not allow that to persist. And that which they gained didn't last, because it wasn't for Allah. Because that which is done for Allah lasts. Ma kana lillah, that which is for Allah, abqa, it remained. And that which was done for other than Allah, it will not remain. It will not remain. Barakallahu feekum. So these individuals, they come along, and they will not clearly state, when they see shirk, they will not say it's shirk. At the most they'll say, okay, what they're doing is wrong, but we have greater issues here. Some of them say, these people who call upon the dead, with making dua to them, not for them. There's a difference between making dua for a person and to a person. Making dua for a person is mashru'. It's legislated that you make dua for your mother, for your father, for your grandparents, for the righteous believers, making dua that Allah showers mercy upon them and forgives them. Making dua to them is completely different, because now you are supplicating to them, asking them for aid. So they will say that those who call upon the dead and supplicate to them and seek rescue with the inhabitants of the graves, they say that they are not committing shirk, because they do not believe that the dead or these objects of worship that they are worshipping create or give provision or control the universe alongside Allah. So they do not consider them and their acts to be acts of shirk. Because what is shirk to them? That you say that there is another creator besides Allah. This is shirk to them. Shirk to Ahlul Sunnah is what? Worshipping other than Allah is shirk to us, as well as believing that there is another creator besides Allah. To them, shirk is that if you violate the rububiyyah of Allah, then you have committed shirk. So for example, if you say that there is another creator besides Allah, they say, oh, this is shirk. But making dua to other than Allah, they say, no, this is not shirk, because these are the actions of the slave. So if you associate partners with Allah in the acts of Allah, in the actions of Allah, in their eyes you have committed shirk. So they say there is no razik except for Allah. There is no provider except for Allah. There is no khaliq except for Allah. There is no mudabbir except for Allah. There is no controller of the affairs except for Allah. They say, look, this is tawheed. We say, so far you've agreed with the mushrikeen of Quraysh. As we mentioned yesterday. قُلْ لِمَنِ الْأَرْضِ, say to them, to whom belongs the earth? They will say it is Allah. Who is the one who controls the affairs? Mudabbirul amr. They will say it is Allah. Who is the one who gives life to the dead? They will say it is Allah. Who? Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab. The mushrikeen, they would say that. Even they would affirm that these are rights belonging only to Allah. But when it came to the af'alul ibad, the actions of the servant himself, if he directed worship to other than Allah, they would say this is not shirk. This is not shirk. So long as you affirm that Allah is one, then even if you direct your worship to the graves, this is not shirk in the eyes of the mutakallimeen. This is how you recognize them. So they say, they do not consider these acts to be acts of shirk. Rather they believe that the objects of worship that they are worshipping, that they are means of nearness to Allah, they are wasa'il, that they are means that bring you closer to Allah. They say, Abdul-Qadir Jilani, when we say, Ya Abdul-Qadir, help me, he is only bringing us closer to Allah. And they are intermediaries between us and Allah, they are wasa'it. They say, look, we do not consider them to be Allah. We do not consider them to be creators and sustainers and providers and givers of life and givers of death. They are just intermediaries between us and Allah. So when we call upon Ahmad al-Badawi, or when we call upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or when we call upon Ali, and they say, Ya Ali, Madad, Ya Ali, help us. Or when we call upon Hussein, these are just intermediaries between us and Allah. Interceding, they are interceding for us. Making shafa'ah. They are intercessors between us and Allah. So therefore they don't consider that to be shirk. They don't consider it to be shirk. And this is the mistake of many of the sects within Islam today, who ascribe themselves to Islam, from the sects of the Shia and Sufiyyah, who call themselves, they say that we are Ahlul Tasawwuf. And what they mean by Sufism, or what they portray, by what they intend by Sufism, they say, look, we have no concern with the dunya. We are simple people, we just make ibadah. But actually the ideas of the Sufis behind all of that is this: taking the inhabitants of the graves as intercessors between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inshallah in the next dars we'll expand upon that further. Barakallahu feekum. And we'll conclude upon that point for now. وجزاكم الله خيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.